A cold, rainy evening. On a small city street, streetlights shimmered against the rain-slick pavement. Droplets fell rhythmically, forming rippling circles on the fogged-up window of an old cafe. Inside, warmth lingered, thick with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the faint scent of aged wood from the worn-out tables and chairs. A strange sense of nostalgia filled the air. Johnny Depp, then only 35 years old, sat quietly in a dimly lit corner. His well-worn leather jacket was draped casually over the chair beside him. He absently stirred the steaming black coffee in front of him, his gaze drifting beyond the misty glass, as if lost in a thought he himself couldn't quite grasp. Outside, the wind howled softly, carrying a biting chill that seeped into the cafe. A few scattered patrons sat around, their murmured conversations blending seamlessly with the gentle hum of jazz playing in the background. But then, amid the subdued symphony of voices and music, a particular exchange caught Johnny's attention. At the table beside him, two young women, both in their early 20s, were talking. Their voices didn't carry the casual tone of a normal conversation. There was an underlying tension, a restrained anger simmering beneath their words. He's still living well, laughing as if he never ruined anyone's life. I want to look him in the eyes. I want to see if he regrets it. Johnny furrowed his brow slightly. Something about the way they spoke triggered an odd sense of familiarity, as if he had heard this story before, or worse, as if he had been a part of it. He didn't turn his head immediately. Instinct told him to keep his distance, but another part of him found it impossible to ignore. A man, someone, had wronged these two women's family. Someone had hurt them so deeply that they couldn't forget, that they were searching for him just to see if there was even a shred of remorse in his eyes. Johnny had no reason to intervene. This wasn't his problem. But something about the raw emotion in their voices, grief tangled with anger, made his heart beat just a little faster. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or maybe it wasn't. Lisa, the young woman with her hair tied high in a ponytail, slammed her coffee cup onto the table. Her fingers tightened around the paper cup as if she wanted to crush it. Her eyes burned with fury. I remember the day my father came home, his eyes red. Anna, the other woman, placed a gentle hand on her sister's shoulder, as if trying to comfort her. But even she couldn't hide the sorrow and anger glistening in her own gaze. He took everything from our father. Johnny's breath slowed. Took everything. A man had stripped their father of something so significant that they could never forget it. Had their father once worked in bartending? He wasn't sure, but this feeling, the dull ache in his chest, was more than curiosity. It felt like a buried memory clawing its way back to the surface. He stared into his cup of coffee, watching the ripples disturb the deep black surface, reflecting his troubled eyes. And then, suddenly, a name echoed in his mind. Henry Caldwell. The air in the cafe seemed to grow colder. Johnny didn't blink. Henry, a man who had once been an exceptional bartender, someone Johnny had trusted, a man who had stood by his side in the early days of his first bar, a man whose passion for cocktails had been unmatched, whose precision in layering the perfect drink had been an art form. And then, he vanished. No farewell, no trace. Or rather, Johnny had left him no way to return. Johnny swallowed hard. A creeping unease tightened around his mind. The foggy fragments of the past sharpened, coming into focus. There had been an argument, a mistake, a decision made in pride or anger, something that had left consequences he hadn't foreseen. Could it be? Were these two women talking about Henry? Johnny glanced at them, this time truly seeing them. The contours of their faces, the way they spoke about their father with both reverence and sorrow. What if Henry was their father? His hand clenched involuntarily. Could it be that they were talking about him? No, impossible. He had always prided himself on being fair. He had never intentionally hurt anyone. But what if he had been wrong? What if, in a single moment of anger, he had unknowingly done something unforgivable? The unease in Johnny's chest swelled. He could no longer sit still. Whatever the truth was, he needed to know. Because if these two women were searching for a man to confront, to demand justice from, and if that man was him, then it was time for Johnny Depp to face his past. The air inside the cafe grew heavier. Johnny felt as if his chest was tightening, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The words of the two women echoed in his mind, sharp as blades cutting deep into forgotten memories. He could have chosen to ignore it. He could have simply lowered his head, focused on his cooling coffee, and let the conversation fade into the background. Just another story among thousands he had overheard in bustling bars and cafes. But something inside him refused to let it go. He knew this feeling all too well, the feeling of standing at a crossroads, one path leading forward as if nothing had happened, the other forcing him to turn around and confront the shadows of the past. And this time, he couldn't walk away. Slowly, Johnny set his cup down and rose to his feet. The chair scraped lightly against the floor, a small sound, yet in the tense silence, it felt deafening. The two women were still deep in conversation. Lisa sat with her arms crossed, her gaze burning with unresolved anger. Anna, quieter but just as wounded, carried sorrow in her eyes that spoke of years of pain. Johnny stepped toward their table. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation." Both women turned to him simultaneously. A flicker of surprise crossed Lisa's face, but she quickly masked it with suspicion. "And who are you?" Johnny didn't answer right away. He looked at them, sensing the weight of the moment. A part of him wanted to lie, to pretend he was just a stranger interested in their story, but he knew that wasn't an option. "Just someone who needs to understand the truth," Johnny said, his voice low. "I need to know, who exactly are you looking for?" Lisa let out a dry laugh. "You really don't know?" Johnny remained silent. Lisa leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her eyes locking onto his. "Johnny Depp!" For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Johnny's chest tightened. A part of him had already expected this, but hearing his own name fall from their lips felt like a punch on straight to the gut. There was no doubt anymore. They were talking about him. A heavy silence followed. Lisa and Anna studied Johnny, waiting for his reaction, but he couldn't find the words. Not because he wanted to deny it, but because he wasn't sure if he truly was the man they hated. "He destroyed my father's life," Henry Caldwell. Anna's voice trembled with raw emotion. Unlike Lisa, who masked her rage in cold defiance, Anna's pain bled through every word. Johnny felt his breath hitch. Henry. The name echoed in his mind, not just a distant memory this time, but a face, a presence, a story suddenly coming into focus. A man with sharp yet kind eyes, someone meticulous in his craft, a bartender who had once been Johnny's right hand when he first opened his bar. And then one day, he was gone. I don't remember what I did." Johnny's voice was low, almost breaking, but Lisa wasn't about to let him escape that easily. "Don't pretend," she snapped, eyes blazing. "You threw my father out of the bar. You made sure he couldn't get a job anywhere." Johnny froze. Scattered memories rushed back like flashes of lightning in a stormy night. He remembered an argument, a late night at the bar, Henry's voice filled with frustration, rising in anger. He remembered himself, just as furious, saying things he never should have said. And then, everything blurred. But one thing was certain, Henry disappeared. And Johnny had never once asked what happened to him after that. He had always prided himself on being fair. But now, staring into the wounded eyes of the two women before him, he wondered, had he been too arrogant to see that sometimes, even he could be wrong? Lisa clenched her fists. "Do you think my father deserved this?" The question stabbed straight into Johnny's heart. No one deserved that. But he couldn't answer. Not yet, because there were still pieces of the past missing. Taking a deep breath, he met their gaze. "I need to see him." Anna's expression shifted to shock. Lisa narrowed her eyes. "Why?" Her voice was cold. Johnny didn't flinch. "If I truly did what you say, then I need to face it." Lisa and Anna exchanged a look. For the first time, hesitation flickered in their eyes. Finally, Lisa spoke, her tone guarded but firm. If you really want to know the truth, come with us. Johnny nodded. He didn't know what awaited him, but one thing was certain. He couldn't run anymore. The apartment was on the third floor of an old building, where the peeling walls and creaky wooden stairs told the story of time. The musty scent lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee left in a cup that had gone cold on the windowsill. Johnny walked slowly behind Lisa and Anna, each step echoing on the worn wooden floor. Lisa stopped in front of a faded blue door. She took a deep breath, as if gathering all her courage before knocking 3 times. The sound echoed in the prolonged silence, making time feel as if it had frozen. A moment passed, then a hoarse voice came from inside. "Come in." Lisa turned the doorknob. The door creaked open, groaning under the weight of the years. The dim light from the lone desk lamp illuminated the face of a man sitting in an old wooden chair. Henry Caldwell. Johnny almost didn't recognize him. The man who once brimmed with energy, always standing confidently behind the bar with skillful hands, was now just a shadow of the past. His hair had turned completely white, his skin deeply lined with wrinkles, but his eyes, those eyes remained as sharp as ever. Henry looked at Johnny. There was no burning anger, no resentment like Johnny had imagined. Only exhaustion, the exhaustion of a man who had carried pain for far too long. "So, you finally came." His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Johnny feel a tightness in his chest. He lowered his head, feeling smaller in front of this man than ever before. "I need to hear the truth." 3 simple words, yet they carried the full weight of a past that had never been closed. Henry let out a dry chuckle. It wasn't a laugh of joy, only of understanding. He slowly leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Johnny. "The truth? Do you really want to hear it?" Johnny nodded, though deep down he knew this truth would not be easy to face. Lisa and Anna remained silent. They just stood there waiting. Outside the window, the streetlights cast their glow into the room, stretching the shadows across the floor. A night breeze slipped through the cracks, gently stirring the old curtains. The silence was so deep that Johnny could hear his own heartbeat pounding against his ribs. Henry took a deep breath. Then he began to speak. "I once believed that you were a kid with potential." His voice carried slowly, heavily. Each word was like a blade slicing through the past, reviving memories that Johnny thought he had buried. "But you took everything from me." Johnny didn't respond. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. Any justification would be meaningless now. He stood still, feeling the weight of those words pressing down on his shoulders. "I remember that day clearly, Johnny." "Do you?" Henry leaned back, his gaze shifting to the ceiling as if reliving the moment. "You walked into the bar, full of ambition, full of fire. I saw myself in you. I believed you could continue what I had built." He paused, smiling bitterly. "But I was wrong." A sharp pain shot through Johnny's chest. "Do you remember standing in front of me that night? The night you decided the bar no longer needed me?" Henry's voice wasn't raised, wasn't loud, but there was something in it that made Johnny unable to lift his head. He remembered. He remembered it all. He remembered standing behind the bar, papers in hand, making a decision without hesitation. Back then, he thought it was necessary. That for the bar to thrive, for it to become something modern, he had to eliminate what was outdated. And Henry, the man who had devoted his life to the place, had become part of what was outdated. He had never once looked back. "I lost everything, Johnny." Henry didn't need to say anything more. The years of being forgotten, the bitter nights, the slammed doors when he tried to find another job. Not because he wasn't skilled, but because the name Henry Caldwell had become synonymous with failure, and it was Johnny who had made that happen. A cold shiver ran down Johnny's spine. In his life, he had done many things. He had achieved success, built a reputation, gained everything a man could wish for. But now, standing before Henry, he realized he had never truly faced the consequences of his decisions. No one had ever dared to speak to him as Henry just did. No one had ever forced him to look directly at his mistakes. "I once believed that you had a heart, but you never looked back, Johnny." Not once. Silence filled the room. Lisa and Anna remained there, not saying a word. Johnny swallowed hard. He wanted to say something, an apology, an explanation, anything. But he knew none of it would matter. He took a deep breath, lifted his head, looked straight into Henry's eyes. I was wrong. 3 simple words, but they carried the weight of an entire past. The room fell into silence. Henry stared at Johnny for a long time. Lisa and Anna held their breath. No one spoke. Time simply passed, quietly and relentlessly. At last, Henry let out a sigh. Not a sigh of anger, not of blame, but the sigh of a man who had waited too long to hear those words. Johnny did not expect immediate forgiveness. He did not need it. He only knew that, for the first time in his life, he was truly facing himself. Inside the small room, the light from the desk lamp cast shadows over Henry's aged face. His eyes were still sharp, but there was no longer any fury in them. Only the exhaustion of a man who had carried his pain for too long. Johnny remained standing, silently waiting. The words he had just spoken hung in the air, like a sentence suspended over him. Yet he did not shy away from it. Henry stared into Johnny's eyes as if trying to pierce through his soul. Then he sighed again, his breath heavy with the weight of time. Do you truly regret it? The question came slowly, deliberately. It was not just a question, it was a test. A final chance for Johnny to prove whether he was sincere. Johnny did not hesitate. He did not pause to think. He nodded, not because he wanted immediate forgiveness, not because he hoped to atone for his mistakes with empty words. He nodded because it was the truth. He regretted it, regretted his decisions, regretted never looking back, regretted not thinking about the consequences his actions had brought upon others. Henry studied Johnny carefully, searching for even the slightest hint of dishonesty in his gaze, but he found nothing. Johnny was not trying to justify himself. He was not making excuses. He was simply accepting his mistakes. Henry lifted his teacup and took a slow sip. The steam curled into the air, weaving its way through the cold silence of the room. Lisa and Anna remained quiet. The sharpness of their resentment was no longer as strong as before. Something had shifted, and uncertainty had settled in. They had waited so long for this moment. They had believed that just seeing Johnny, seeing him regret, would erase all the pain in their hearts. But now, witnessing Johnny truly confront his past, they felt empty. Could hatred and resentment last forever? Perhaps, but it would change nothing. Henry placed his cup back on the table, the porcelain making a soft clinking sound against the wood. Then he gave a slight nod. I don't need an apology. I just want to see you do the right thing. Just one sentence, but it was like a gentle breeze breaking through the heavy air in the room. Lisa and Anna could hardly believe their ears. Had their father forgiven him? No, this was not full forgiveness, but it was the first step. For the first time in many years, Henry was no longer letting his resentment weigh him down. Lisa lowered her head, feeling strangely hollow yet relieved. How long had she been waiting for this moment? Johnny remained standing, motionless. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do, because Henry's words were not just acceptance, they were responsibility. Do the right thing. But how could he atone for his mistakes? He couldn't turn back time. He couldn't return the lost years to Henry. But he could create something better. And in that moment, an idea flashed through his mind. Johnny turned to Lisa and Anna. The two girls still looked uncertain, struggling to grasp the significance of what had just happened. He took a deep breath and spoke. I want to make things right. Would you be willing to work with me? Lisa frowned, eyeing Johnny with suspicion. Are you joking? Her voice carried a sharp edge of disbelief. Johnny shook his head. Number, I want to teach you everything I know. Lisa and Anna exchanged glances. They couldn't understand Johnny's true intentions. He was a man who had everything. Fame, wealth, a successful career. Why would he want to help them? Anna glanced at her father. Henry remained silent, but he did not object. Lisa crossed her arms, her voice cold. You think that just by helping us, you can make up for what you did? Johnny didn't blink. He met her gaze head on. Number, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to do the right thing. Lisa opened her mouth, ready to argue, but then she realized there was no falsehood in his words. Johnny wasn't trying to buy redemption with money or stage a grand gesture to erase his past sins. He truly wanted to help them. But why? Johnny looked directly at Lisa and Anna. I used to be arrogant. I thought I could make it on my own, that I didn't need anyone's help. But the truth is, I had mentors, people who guided me when I was nobody. He swallowed hard. Henry was one of those people. The air in the room felt heavier. Johnny continued, he taught me many things, but I betrayed that trust. I took away his opportunity. And now, if I have a chance to make things right, I want to dedicate it to you both. Lisa and Anna remained silent. Johnny took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. I want you to learn everything I know, not just bartending, not just managing a bar. I want you to have the opportunity that Henry never had. Anna tightened her grip on her hands. She had never thought about this before. They had spent so much time hating, chasing after Johnny, seeking justice for their father, but they had never considered continuing the path their father had lost. Lisa was still hesitant. She had grown up resenting Johnny Depp. Accepting his offer now, did that mean betraying all those years of anger? She turned to her father, searching for an answer. Henry slowly stood up. He stepped toward Johnny and looked at him for a long moment. Then he gave a slight nod. He said nothing, just a nod. But it carried more meaning than 1,000 words. Lisa swallowed hard. Then she took a deep breath. All right. Her voice was quiet but firm. Anna turned to look at her sister, then at Johnny. She nodded too. A decision had been made, not because they had forgiven him, but because they wanted to move forward. Because sometimes, the best way to overcome the past is to create a new future. The bar's kitchen always carried the faint scent of liquor, mixed with the woody aroma of old oak barrels. The sound of ice clinking against glass echoed steadily, blending with the familiar noises of the bar counter. Tonight, like every other night, Johnny stood behind the bar. But this time, he was not alone. Lisa and Anna stood before him, neatly wearing black aprons, each holding a shaker, their eyes still filled with hesitation. They had agreed to work with Johnny, but not because they trusted him. Rather, they wanted to understand more about the craft their father had dedicated his life to. The first lesson began under a tense atmosphere. Lisa held a bottle of vodka, but her hands trembled slightly. She had never mixed a drink before. Memories of her father surfaced in her mind, the way he carefully wiped each glass, the dexterity with which he poured every drop of liquor, the respect he had for his profession. Johnny stood beside her, watching patiently. Don't grip it too tightly. Feel the weight of the bottle in your hand. Lisa took a deep breath and followed his instructions. This time, her grip was steadier. Anna stood beside her, observing everything. She said nothing, but the resentment in her gaze had softened. In the following days, Johnny taught them the basics: how to mix cocktails, how to appreciate each ingredient, how to interact with customers. But the real lessons were not just in technique, but in facing themselves. Some nights, Lisa and Anna stayed after closing hours, silently watching Johnny work. Slowly, they began to realize that he was no longer the arrogant man of the past. He was patient, dedicated, and attentive to every small detail. Lisa started to understand that bartending was not just about mixing liquor with ice. It was an art, a form of storytelling, a bridge between people. One night, Anna suddenly asked, "Why do you want to teach us?" Johnny was wiping a glass. He paused at her question. "Because I made a mistake, and I don't want to repeat it. No grand speeches, no justifications. Just a simple statement." But it left Anna deep in thought. Lisa watched Johnny silently. She was no longer sure of her own feelings. At first, she thought she would hate Johnny forever. But the more she worked with him, the more she realized that he was not the man she had believed him to be. He had changed, and that confused her. One evening, Johnny slid a cocktail glass toward Lisa. "Try making this according to the recipe." Lisa looked at the drink. It seemed ordinary. A little vodka, lemon juice, a bit of almond syrup. But when she tasted it, the flavor brought back childhood memories. "This is," Johnny nodded. "Yes, this is your father's recipe." Lisa froze. Johnny had found the old recipe, had taken the time to learn it, perfect it, and now he was giving it back to her. Lisa didn't know what to say, but something inside her shifted. They were no longer enemies. They were learning to understand each other. And Lisa knew, perhaps it was time for her to let go of the past and step forward. Time passed faster than they expected. The lessons gradually turned into real work. Lisa and Anna were no longer just two girls clinging to past grievances. They had truly become skilled bartenders. Customers started to remember them, not as the new girls, but by their names, their styles, their unique touches. Johnny stood silently watching them. He had once been the sole master behind this bar, but now he knew. The bar was no longer his alone. One night after the bar had closed, Lisa stepped up to Johnny. "You helped us." Her voice no longer carried the cold edge it once did. "But it's time for us to stand on our own." Johnny was surprised. Lisa continued, "We want to open our own bar, a place for my father." Anna nodded. "The Caldwell Lounge." Johnny stood still. He had known this day would come, and he knew it was the right thing. But for some reason, he still felt a small emptiness inside. Lisa looked at him, then suddenly smiled. "You should come to the grand opening." Johnny chuckled. "I thought you didn't want anything to do with me anymore." Lisa shook her head. "We want you to be there." Anna smiled as well. "After everything, you are a part of this story too." Johnny looked at them, then nodded. On the opening day, Lisa and Anna's new bar was packed with customers. They were no longer just two nameless girls behind someone else's counter. Now they were in charge. Johnny stepped into the bar and looked around. It had a different style from his own, warmer, more personal. But one thing remained unchanged, the spirit of Henry Caldwell. Lisa walked up to him and placed a cocktail in front of him. "Try this." Johnny took a sip. He recognized it immediately. It was Henry's recipe. He looked up to see Lisa smiling. "I think he'd be proud." Johnny said nothing. He only nodded. And deep down, he knew Henry truly would be proud of them, of his daughters, of everything they had accomplished. Johnny set the glass down and took one last look around. He knew he owed them nothing anymore, and they owed him nothing either. They had completely stepped out of the past, and that, more than anything, was true forgiveness. The air in the Caldwell Lounge was filled with excitement. It was opening night, and the first guests had arrived early. The warm golden lights reflected off the polished crystal glasses, the subtle scent of liquor blending with the lively chatter. The bar's sign stood out on the street, a simple name, but one carrying an entire history. Lisa stood behind the counter, her eyes shining with pride. Anna adjusted a small flower vase on the bar, where their vibrant signature cocktails were displayed. Then the door opened once more. For a moment, the room fell silent as Henry walked in. His hair was whiter than before, his stance not as firm as it once was, but his eyes still held the unwavering strength of a man who had seen it all. Lisa and Anna froze, their hearts holding their breath. Johnny stood by the bar, watching quietly. Henry scanned the bar, his eyes slowly moving over every detail, the small touches his daughters had poured their hearts into. Everything in this place carried a part of Henry. The oak bar stools, the classic-style counter, the old photograph of him in his younger years, hanging near the entrance. Lisa stepped forward, holding a cocktail in her hands. She placed it in front of him. "I named it Legacy." Henry looked at the drink before him. Something deep inside him stirred. The scent of the liquor carried memories of the past, the moments he once thought had been buried under the dust of time. He lifted the glass, his fingers brushing against the cold surface. Lisa and Anna waited, silent. Johnny remained still, his eyes never leaving Henry. Henry took a slow sip. The flavors unfolded across his tongue, bringing back the echoes of another time. The light tang of citrus, the slight bitterness of strong liquor, the smooth, honeyed warmth. It was more than just a drink. It was a story, a journey. Henry set the glass down and turned to Johnny. There was no coldness in his eyes anymore. No resentment, only understanding. His lips curled into the faintest smile, a small gesture, but enough to brighten the entire room. "You made it right." The words were brief, but they carried an entire lifetime of acknowledgement. For the first time in many years, Johnny felt truly at peace. Lisa looked at Johnny, then at her father. A warmth spread through her chest. They had come a long way to reach this moment. No more words were needed. Everything had been settled. The night stretched on. The bar was still illuminated, but most of the customers had left. Johnny stood at the counter, quietly watching Lisa and Anna clean up. He remembered the first day they had walked into his life, full of anger, full of unresolved wounds from the past. Now they were no longer those girls. They were real bartenders, professionals who understood the value of patience, dedication, and the legacy their father had built. Lisa glanced up and saw Johnny watching them. She smiled. "Tonight, you are our special guest, but next time, don't expect a free drink." Johnny laughed. "I won't expect one." Anna dried the last glass and placed it neatly on the shelf. "Do you regret it?" The question was unexpected, but it didn't catch Johnny off guard. He remained silent for a moment, then slowly shook his head. "Number I used to, but not anymore." Lisa tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. Johnny continued, "I've realized something. Everyone makes mistakes, but what matters isn't running from them." He looked at Lisa and Anna. It's facing them, making it right, and starting over. No one in the room disagreed, because they knew it was the truth. Forgiveness cannot change the past, but it can redefine the future. Lisa and Anna didn't just restore justice for their father. They found a new path for themselves, a future they could be proud of. And Johnny, he didn't just right a wrong. He left behind a better legacy. And that, more than anything, was what truly mattered.